Although there has always been controversy surrounding Jim Jones, this time it has gotten out of hand. What began as a typical day at the airport devolved into a chaotic showdown that could potentially end his career. Witnesses described the scene as resembling a reality TV meltdown, complete with flying bags, screaming voices, and a moment when it appeared as though Jim Jones had thrown everything away. Industry insiders are already discussing it. The whispers aren't looking good, promoters are retreating, sponsors are ceasing to speak, and fans are split. Social media is ablaze, with some proclaiming this the end of the world and others supporting Jim Jones. However, the real question is how it all began. Did Jim Jones start the altercation, or was he set up for failure? More importantly, has this one incident totally destroyed his career? Stay tuned because you're about to hear Jim Jones appeared confident as he walked through the airport in his trademark swagger, wearing a designer tracksuit, with heavy chains around his neck and glasses resting low on his nose. It was just another day, another flight, another city, and he had places to be, deals to make, and money to stack. The flashing cameras and the fans' whispers that recognized him didn't faze him. He was accustomed to it, but something felt strange. Jim ignored it at first, thinking it might be nothing or that he was simply exhausted, but then a voice from across the terminal cut through the airport like a blade, making him think that he could just go about his day like that. Jim's steps slowed, his brow furrowed slightly behind his shades, and he turned his head just enough to see who had spoken. Jim's heart rate remained constant as a man with a mean-looking jaw clenched tight stood a few feet away from him. He was accustomed to confrontations and people trying to push him in public, but this time it was different. The man approached him, his hands balling into fists, and people noticed a murmur go through the crowd. Hamas began rolling. Something was about to go down, Jim said coolly, his voice steady, but that was the wrong response. The man lunged quickly and aggressively before Jim could react, sending him stumbling backward, his foot catching on a metal divider, almost sending him to the ground, his sunglasses going flying, skidding across the floor, and his mind racing. Jim adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and exhaled slowly. When a young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, the woman clutched her purse and stepped back in shock. People froze, but Jim wasn't the type to back down. He caught himself before he fell, and his stance and face darkened. His voice was low-controlled, but anyone who knew Jim Jones knew that tone meant war. The man smirked and cracked his knuckles, saying that he wanted this, that he had planned for this, and that he was looking for a fight. That dropped his duffel bag on the floor game, and immediately after the first punch barely missed Jim's face, instinct took over. He had been in fights before, and he had thrown hands in worse places than an airport, but this wasn't just any fight, it was a spectacle, with cameras recording every move, every punch, and every word. Jim knew that he had two options: fight back and risk everything, or leave and appear weak. Jim's pride made the decision for him. The man grunted, but instead of backing down, he lunged again, grabbing at Jim's collar and trying to pull him forward. Jim fought back, and the entire airport was filled with TSA officers shouting that the fight was messy, brutal, and devoid of stag nonsense. The man threw another punch, but Jim blocked it, and a second later, they were locked in. A fight broke out as they gripped each other's shirts and strained their muscles, and then the man slammed Jim against a metal railing. The sound reverberated throughout the terminal, and everyone's mouths were screaming. Someone knocked over a luggage cart, and a baby began to cry. It was pure madness. Jim gritted his teeth, because this guy wasn't just there to fight, he wanted to humiliate him, but that wasn't going to happen. Jim twisted, breaking. The man stumbled and was freed from the grip, but security tackled them both hard at that very moment. Jim hit the ground hard, his face pressed against the cold airport floor, his knee in his back, his handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and the other man struggled while shouting into the cameras. He wiped the blood that trickled from his lip with the back of his hand and grinned. Jim Jones felt the cold bite of the airport floor against his cheek as the weight of the security guard pressed down on his back, his muscles tensed, adrenaline still flowing through his veins. He wasn't finished fighting, by a long shot, but now it wasn't his opponent he had to deal with, it was the law. Jim growled, twisting. Flashed, it was over, or so Jim thought, because what happened next would turn this from a viral fight into the biggest scandal of his career. The other guy, who started the whole mess, was on the ground too, but he wasn't resisting. Instead, he was smirking, and that's when it hit Jim. The entire confrontation, the fight, the way the cameras were aimed at him before the first punch was delivered, everything was set up because someone wanted to see Jim Jones fall, and as security yanked him to his feet and shoved him forward, the voices of the Jim's mind raced as he was dragged through the airport, wondering why his label was an industry rival, someone seeking influence, or something more significant than that. Was this about something from his past finally catching up with him? The crowd confirmed his worst fears. Damn, Jim really out here wildin', ain't no way he coming back from this, bro, just threw away his whole career. Jim clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain silent so they wouldn't see him crack, but his mind was racing because he knew the real fight was just getting started back at the station inside the airport. Jim's head snapped toward his so-called opponent, who was now being escorted by another officer. Their eyes locked, and then the man winked. That was all Jim needed to see that Jim's cuffed leg was still bouncing impatiently as the police discussed charges of assault and disturbing the public order. The words were like bullets, each one striking harder than the last. Jim could already see the headlines: Jim Jones Air RTE after violent airport crawl, Gene Jones career in jet party after brutal attack, and then the worst one, the one he knew was coming: Jim Jones, another rapper who was unable to leave the streets. He exhaled sharply in an attempt to "What the hell were you thinking?" Jim scoffed, leaning back in his chair, and said, "You really think I started this?" Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. This was exactly what they wanted, and his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a noon's attitude, stormed into the room. Vanessa Carter was the best, and she wasn't happy, so she started throwing a folder onto the table. That Vanessa's expression darkened. She knew what he was saying made sense, but that didn't change the facts. "The industry doesn't care about the truth," she said bluntly. "They care about the narrative, and at the moment, the narrative is that Jim Jones is a loose cannon who can't control his temper." June shook his head, which was a setup. "That guy was waiting for me. Cameras were rolling before I even said a word." Tightened. He had spent years establishing his reputation as a rapper, businessman, leader, and mogul, but now everything was falling apart. The door to the room opened again, and a policeman came in with a piece of paper. "Good news, Mr. Jones," he said bluntly. "You're free to go, no charges." But he hesitated. "I'd lay low if I were you." Jim narrowed his eyes, wondering why the officer had slid the paper across the table. They wanted him gone, but who were they and why? Jim looked up at Vanessa with fire in his eyes and said, "Find out who's behind this, because I'm not going down like this." Vanessa nodded and began dialing numbers. This was a tweet from an industry insider, and it stated that Jim Jones had just ended his own career. Major brands had already pulled deals, and the label was thinking about his options. Jim sat in the back of his black SUV and stared out the window as the city lights flickered by. His phone was buzzing constantly, but he ignored it because there were too many messages and too much noise. He already knew what they would say because his name was on every blog, gossip page, and industry insider feed. They weren't just talking about the fight anymore, they were talking about the fallout, and it was getting worse the more Vanessa was on the phone. When she argued with someone from the label, she used a sharp voice. "No, you listen to me. Pulling his endorsements would be a mistake. This was a setup. We have proof that my team is working on the footage," she said. Jim exhaled slowly, hoping they had it, because if they didn't, he was finished. The SUV came to a stop outside his penis. Jim stepped out, hood pulled low over his head, avoiding the nearby paparazzi who had already set up outside. He entered, locked the door behind him, and for the first time since the fight, he was alone. He took out his phone and finally scrolled through the messages. Everyone had something to say. "Cameron bro. They tried to bury you, man. You're good. Alia Banks LNFLOOOO. I knew it." Jim rolled his eyes, but then one message caught his attention. The unknown number said, "You should have stayed quiet." Now. Jim learned the hard way. He quickly typed back, "Jim, who is this asterisk?" but got no response. His heart was racing as he stared at the screen, wondering who stood to gain the most from this. It wasn't just any random internet troll, it was someone who knew him and wanted him out of the game. The labels had previously been vocal about Bad contracts? Perhaps someone was finally sick of him talking about a rival artist, but it's unlikely that most of them were. Jim was preoccupied with his own drama, or was it someone from his past? He rubbed his temples and needed answers. His phone buzzed again, this time it was Vanessa. "We have a problem," Jim said. Vanessa wasn't happy, so she slid a tablet across the table and watched this. Jim press play. It was new footage of the fight, but it was from a different angle. The other guy smirked as Jim got up to leave. The next segment of the video showed two men standing in the background, watching Jim. He instantly recognized them as music executives, not just any executives, who had been attempting to persuade him to sign a new contract for months. Jim leaned in closer and whispered something as he watched the playback. It was time for the cameras to roll. Jim's stomach dropped. "Don't want you gone," and they're not being subtle about it. Jim clenched his fists, and this was war. The following morning, the headlines were worse, with major brands taking offense at Jim Jones after the fight at the airport. The record label distances itself from Jim Jones amid controversy, according to insiders, who claim that his career is over. Jim threw his phone across the room, and they were moving too quickly. Vanessa then burst into the room, stealing his laptop and hand. "We must get ahead of this, Jim." Jim leaned back and rubbed his face, saying, "This isn't about right or wrong, this is about perception. If you don't speak out, the industry will control the narrative, and once that happens you'll never come back from this." She exhaled sharply. "You're not going to like it," and he looked at her waiting. She took a deep breath, and Jim stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "No," Vanessa sighed. Jim begged for forgiveness. Vanessa shook her head. "No, we do this cleverly. We craft a statement that makes it clear that you were provoked and that she regrets how things went down, but he won't let this define you." Jim exhaled. He hated this, but she was right. They were coming for everything he had built, and if he didn't fight back, he would lose it all. Jim took a deep breath and stared at the camera in front of him. This wasn't what he wanted, and he never imagined having to defend himself because of this. However, he was about to record a statement that would determine his future. Vanessa stood behind the camera, arms crossed, and stern. "Just keep it real, Jim. Say what you have to say, but don't give them more ammunition." Jim nodded and ran a hand over his face. He then hit record. "Hey, everyone, this is Jim. I won't lie. These past few days have been crazy. I know you've seen the headlines, the videos, and the rumors that everyone has to correct the record." He exhaled and carefully chose his words, saying, "I got into a fight. Yes, I don't want them to sit here and pretend that wasn't me, but what they're not telling you is the entire story. You can't see what happened before that clip started rolling, and you can't hear what was said to me. The people pushing this narrative are aware that they are setting me up to fail." Jim's jaw tensed as he leaned forward, saying, "Look, I'm not perfect. I made mistakes, but don't let these blobs and industry folks fool you. This wasn't just some random incident, this was planned." He paused for a moment, considering whether or not to say what was truly on his mind. "Fuck it, these labels. These executives, they've been trying to push me out for a minute. I've been speaking out on how they play dirty, how they trap artists in these bad deals, how they profit off our struggles," and now Vanessa gave him a small nod, indicating that he was headed in the right direction. Jim went on, "I see what's going on. They want me to be another artist, they can silence another name, they can cross that off their list, but let me tell you something, I ain't going nowhere. They tried to ruin my career, but I built this on loyalty from genuine supporters, and if you've been rocking, you're doing great. I'm not asking for sympathy or for you to pick a size, I'm asking you to think for yourself and not let these industry games fool you." Jim clicked the camera off, and Vanessa exhaled and stepped forward. That was solid, but now comes the difficult part. Jim scowled. "What do you mean?" She turned her laptop around and saw a news article about Roc Nation cutting ties with Jim. Jim's heart fell during the airport fight controversy. This wasn't just bad, it was the end of his career. He grabbed the laptop and read the article, but the label wasn't just letting him go. They were blackballing him. Sources said he had a violent past, was unprofessional, and was a liability. They were burying him alive. Jim clenched his fists. This is what they wanted all along, Vanessa's side. We can fight this, but Jim, this isn't just PR anymore. They weren't just trying to damage his reputation, they were trying to erase him. Jim looked away, his mind racing, and he grabbed his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd call. "Yo Cam," he said, "we need to talk." There was a long pause, and then a laugh, and he realized that the day was coming. "What's the problem?" Jim exhaled, rubbing his temple. "You saw the news?" Cameron scoffed. "Everyone saw it, bro. You're trending. Like you just dropped a #1 album." Jim paced the room while maintaining a steady voice. "Have you ever had the feeling that people are trying to push you out, as if they're waiting for you to slip?" Jim hesitated and sidestepped every single day, "But you need to tell me if this was just an airport altercation or if there was more to it." Jim hesitated because he wanted to tell him everything, including how security targeted him and how the industry was using this moment to destroy him, but could he trust Cameron? "Look, man, you know we haven't always been on the best of terms, but this time, if they blackball you, what do you think will happen to the rest of us? You're not the only one they're watching, so what do I do?" Cam's voice lowered. "You fight back, but not in the way they expected." Jim to raise an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Cam laughed. "You'll see me in Harlem. We have work." The industry had a long history of turning on artists the moment they became inconvenient, and Jim was officially a problem. Vanessa watched him closely. "So what's the plan?" Jim stood up, cracking his knuckles. And Vanessa nodded. "Okay, so we do more interviews and release more statements." Jim stared at his phone for a long moment before finally sighing. Cameron wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Jim shook his head and said, "No, we're going bigger." The atmosphere in the room was electric, the cameras were set up, the crowd was buzzing. And Jim Jones, flanked by Cameron, Jules Santana, and a few other members of Dipset, stood at the center of it all. This wasn't just a press conference, it was a statement. Jim adjusted the microphone while gazing out at the sea of faces in front of him, which was made up by journalists, fans, and industry inside. That they're trying to tell me that I'm done with this one moment, that I'm out of control, reckless, and a liability, but let me tell you something, I built this. No label, no exit, no industry insider ever gave me anything, no one ever gave me anything. Jules nodded in agreement, and Cameron smirked, knowing they were trying to. The crowd erupted, and Jim's voice remained steady but passionate. "I made a mistake at that airport, yes, and I'm not perfect, but what you're not asking is why I was even put in that situation, why I was targeted, and why the entire industry moved to erase me the moment something happened. However, they don't understand that you can't cancel someone who never needed your approval in the first place." Notes. Jim wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the game. "This isn't just about me, it's about every artist they've worked with, eliminated, and thrown aside. You all think this happened overnight, but no, they've been waiting for the right opportunity to get rid of me." Cameron took the mic, and let's face it, this fight is called a career-ending scandal, which is just an excuse they don't like when one of us speaks too loudly yet we won't go anywhere. Jim took the MC back, "So now they cut my deals cool and blocked my radio play, but you can be sure I won't stop. I started this from the beginning, and once I do it again." Jules smiled. The truth is, Jim looked straight into the cameras as though he was addressing the labels themselves. "You all tried to ruin my career, but all you did was wake me up, drop Mick, and walk away with Vanessa pacing with foam in hand. It's trending already, and the fans are going crazy. #Joan is everywhere." Jim leaned back against the wall, exhausted, "and let's see if they're still trying to erase me." However, before Vanessa could react, Jim's phone buzzed, and he hesitated. Before answering,
"Yeah."
a deep voice spoke that was quite the show. Jones. Jim narrowed his eyes. "Who is this?" A chuckle. "Let's say I'm someone who doesn't like the way the industry plays their gang either, and I might be able to get you back on your terms." Jim looked at Vanessa before leaving the crowd. "I'm listening," but the call went on, but the screen faded to black. "What do you think? Is Jim Jones really being blackballed? Or is this just another industry power move? Did the airport fight really ruin his career, or is this the start of a huge comeback?" Please share your thoughts in the comments section about returning from this, or has the damage already been done, and if he does, will the industry treat him the same way going forward? If you're crushing on Jim and want to watch him disprove everyone, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss the next big thing edit, because, believe me, this narrative is far from over, so keep checking back because eventually, the truth always comes out.